I wanted to talk just a little bit here this evening about kind of a continuation of some of the things we talked about last Sunday night about the balance that the scriptures encourage us to have as we all work together in the kingdom. And I want to look at a passage in Nehemiah chapter 4. And I've always found this particular section of verses very, very uplifting, encouraging, motivating, really inspiring. And what we see is a group of people who all bound themselves together on a common goal and accomplished something that most people thought they were crazy for even setting the goal for themselves. Most people thought you're out of your mind. They mocked them, ridiculed them, thought you'll never, ever even get close to it. And they decided they were going to pray to God about it, and they were going to commit themselves to it, and they accomplished it. And it was pretty impressive. In fact, what they accomplished is what actually we talked about, or actually I briefly mentioned it in last week's bulletin. On the second Sunday of the month, we put up usually something from archaeology or something that's kind of interesting, and they discovered Nehemiah's wall. And I thought that was kind of amazing, kind of proof again of the accuracy of the scriptures, but that was a great accomplishment for them, considering the opposition. But I want to read there Nehemiah chapter 4, and I want to read verse 1. It says, "Now it came about that when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious and very angry and mocked the Jews. He spoke in the presence of his brothers and the wealthy men of Samaria and said, 'What are these feeble Jews doing? Are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones?' Now, Tobiah the Ammonite was near him, and he said, 'Even what they are building, if a fox should jump on it, he would break their stone wall down.'" And one thing I thought was kind of interesting, they actually discovered near that wall, when they uncovered the rubble, there actually was the remains of a fox skeleton against that wall. I think God doesn't have a sense of humor. I think that's hilarious. They mocked it, said a fox is going to knock that thing over. Well, guess what? The fox died. I didn't even need to try to do it. I think that's awesome. And so, against even what they mocked that they couldn't do, they succeeded. And what they did, they just rallied around. They said, we don't care about the negativity. That's really what I have to do. You guys have to block out the negativity and just think positively. So it's just, what a great series of lessons we've been having on Sunday morning about attitude. And I've been really taking that to heart. Sometimes it's just a matter of turning your attitude around. And this is what the people did. They said, we're not going to have a negative attitude. We're going to have a positive attitude. And this is what they did. It says in verse 4, it said, "Hear, O God, how we are despised. Return their reproach on their own heads and give them up for plunder in a land of captivity. Do not forgive their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out before you, for they have demoralized the builders." So we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. They just decided, we're going to think positively, and we're going to block out all that negativity. We're going to let God lead us. And they accomplished this together, which is pretty amazing. And one kind of quick example of what we're trying to accomplish. And really, when you go through the book of Acts, it kind of sets us on point for what is that goal. What is it we're trying to build together in the kingdom? And it is that great effort of reaching out and seeing more souls added to the kingdom and broadening those borders and strengthening a solidarity of unified people who want to serve God and go to heaven. And just want to turn over to the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, chapter 8, again, keeping that mind of keeping balance. One thing you find throughout the book of Acts is, of course, there are other things going on other than evangelism. There's other things certainly we have to do that require attention. But one thing I find fascinating is the book of Acts always keeps us on point. It is always moving, covering those very side effects or those other side issues that inevitably need our attention. But what made them successful is they always kind of stayed on point to continuing to build the walls. and building up the strong kingdom. But look at Acts chapter 8. It's kind of an example of this. In Acts chapter 8 and in verse 4, we see a lot of activity going on of preaching, teaching, evangelizing. And someone to take that. Someone go ahead and read verses 4 through 8.
Therefore those who had been scattered went about preaching the word. Philip went down to the city of Samaria and began proclaiming Christ. Crowds were going forward, were giving attention to what was said by Philip, as they heard and saw the signs which he was performing. For in the case of many who had unclean spirits, they were coming out of them shouting with a loud voice, and many who had been paralyzed and lame were healed. So there was much rejoicing in that city.
So a lot of work going on. He is proclaiming the word, preaching, evangelizing. And what we find in verses 9 through 13, people being baptized, people responding. Then the text zeroes in on a needed solo effort, that there was a man named Simon the sorcerer. And even being baptized, which was great, he was misguided. As often we find people who are added to the Lord's church, they need redirected, they need taught, they need reinforced. And Simon is an example of this. His heart is not right before God. He needs correction. And Peter corrects him. He thought he could buy the power of the Holy Spirit with money. And Peter addresses that. But notice as he addresses it, and immediately the text shows us that they went back to the main focus. So they address this. Acts chapter 8, verse 21. Someone take that, read verses 21 through 24. So he dealt with this, redirected Simon, made sure his heart was fortified, encouraged him to pray to God and be more in line with where he needed to be. After that, notice verse 25. It says, so when they had solemnly testified and spoken the word of the Lord, they started back to Jerusalem and were preaching the gospel to many villages of the Samaritans. And that continues to be the kind of focus of the book of Acts. You see these issues, these areas where certainly they needed to address that, but they always kind of kept the focus on moving forward, making sure that they were preaching and teaching the gospel. And just want to just briefly kind of have maybe a motivational kind of moment just to see what we could accomplish if we all unify ourselves as we see that text in Nehemiah chapter 4. What would it look like? What would it look like, a congregation joining themselves together? And all it would take is just that mind to work together. And I know this is something that's been weighing on my mind a lot. I know Beth and I have talked a lot about it, and just something that we have made a personal goal for ourselves is we want to try to fill up our schedule as much as possible every month, and try to make sure there's somebody that we're contacting, maybe having something to do with, whether it's in our home or maybe meeting them somewhere, or maybe sharing something that we have a hobby or common interest with. And so far we've got January pretty well filled out, and we're trying to fill up the next month and should be able to get it filled out. And we're trying to say anywhere between maybe 3 or 4, at least scheduled. Certain things happen. Of course, sometimes sicknesses. Of course, our family, we've had to deal with that. Other people, you're trying to schedule these things, but they get sick or they have things come up. And you just, maybe if you're lucky, maybe if you get at least one a month. But what I found with anything, if you want at least one a month of anything, you always got to schedule at least a little bit more. You always got to count on maybe things don't always pan out. And one of the reasons we've kind of kept that as our personal goal is, we were talking, I got to thinking, we are brought together once a week. for the sole purpose of thinking about what the Lord has done for us every week. And with what we think about what the Lord has done for us, we're included in thinking about the fact that that's spread all across. Everybody in the world can benefit by what Jesus did on the cross. Again, thinking to myself, could I do any less than if I'm once a week I'm thinking about that, to at least make some effort, to at least see what is possible, whether it's contacting somebody to see how we can maybe get that to be a Bible study or something where we're talking about the Scripture, to see if maybe that can turn into somebody who is interested in the gospel. And if we kind of all join together, just said, what if we all mutually kind of agree that we're going to have some kind of system? And that system may be different for each family. Every family is different. But you're just kind of thinking if that was just something that we kind of use as kind of a reference point. But I got to thinking, well, we have 30 families. And that's roughly, I guess, kind of a rough estimate. But if every family at least made a goal, said, well, we're going to try, maybe 3 or 4, just people we contact, see if maybe someone we can have them over, do something maybe after work, some kind of contact. If 30 families did that 3 or 4 times a month, that's every family committing to 3 or 4 people every month, that could potentially work out to 100 potential Bible studies a month. That's crazy. But yet, didn't they think it was crazy when the people said, well, we want to build up the wall? Well, it's going to take really commitment, of course, and it says that the people had a mind to work. And really, that's what it comes down to, is it's going to take work. There's no getting around that. And I realize this means sacrifice, and this means extra time, and this means extra commitment. It means rearranging things in our schedule. And again, even if it works out to maybe at least one a month. At least one a month. That's what we always said in our household. Said even if we don't get the goal, whatever your personal goal might be, say we got to at least see what can we do to maybe just one person. And I'm a big believer that if you want to build the walls, you got to tear walls down. Everybody has some personal wall that's keeping them from being comfortable having these discussions. Everybody has some kind of personal wall that keeps them at a distance. At the minute maybe you bring up Bible study, maybe you invite them to services, maybe you want to share a lesson that you've heard. We see quickly sometimes those walls quickly kind of go up, right? People have their expectations and fears. And I'm a big believer, just as we see Christ and so many of the apostles doing this, sometimes just getting to know people, maybe spending time with people, can maybe try this. We're trying to just see how we can build or get rid of those barriers as much as possible so that they can have an avenue to discuss. And I thought, well, what would that look like, and how would something like that be done? And really, it's very simple in many ways. It's just, I think of it as kind of a 4-part plan, which consists of just make contacts, show hospitality, commit to a study, and baptisms. That's the goal. But again, I think the way that we can join ourselves together to working together is just at least have some kind of a workable plan in mind. And this is something that maybe I've thought about at times. I thought, well, practically, how would that go? And of course, we need to make contacts, and something that could be as simple as that I know so many people do so well here, if maybe sharing a lesson on your Facebook page. Maybe if we see somebody like that or comment on it, maybe follow up with that, ask them some other questions. And the goal is if we can at least make it a goal for ourselves as a family, individual people and individual families, saying how can we establish some kind of a relationship, let them in on our lives, see if they'll break down the walls and let us in their lives, and break that down as much as possible so that the next step is how can we set up maybe a Bible study. And sometimes that can be as simple as just asking them questions. What do you think about this? Have you heard this going on? I noticed you liked this on our website. What did you think about it? Maybe just generating any kind of conversation that might potentially lead to a study. And then I realized sometimes when we get to this part, sometimes maybe the intimidation part starts saying, well, maybe sit down with somebody and actually have a study. Again, that's something that we can all work together in. realize that we're all at different levels of comfort when it comes to things like that. I'm sure there's plenty of us that would be willing to help anybody if someone would actually say, yeah, I am interested in having a Bible study. I'm interested in maybe asking some questions. And then if we're all working together on this, hopefully we can invite other people, say, hey, well, I was able to have this relationship and have this kind of work towards having some more conversation, and now they're actually wanting to ask me questions, they're actually wanting to study. Anyway, you can come over or we can meet together, and something like that could be certainly arranged and would be awesome if we saw that happening. And if we can commit them to a study further, then again, the goal is to see them being baptized. And when we look again at the pattern of the book of Acts, that seems to be when they made that their focus, and they all worked together in that. That's why we see a lot of these results happening. It's simply that combination of staying focused, being committed, and if we all individually have a plan, or at least have a goal. And again, I believe if the Lord wants us on a weekly basis to think about what He's done and the impact of what He's done potentially for the world, then hopefully we can maybe set a weekly goal, at least making contact, reaching out to somebody. And just wouldn't it be great if we all saw all of us working together and seeing more of the walls of the kingdom being brought up and furthered, and potentially see the great work of God's love being poured out and sinners being converted. And again, just want to read this here together. What was truly amazing about this is what we see the next chapter happens. Chapter 9 happens because of what we see happening in chapters 1 through 8. Chapters 1 through 8, they just decided, hey, we're going to meet together. We're going to be in each other's homes. As they met together, they shared the breaking of bread in each other's homes from time to time. They wanted to get to know each other. They wanted to invite people as being part of that. And they were very successful at generating interest and generating conversation. So we see that chapters 1 through 8, that was their focus. They didn't let anybody intimidate them or discourage them. And then guess what happens? Chapter 9, they just so happened to get involved the chief persecutor. And there's a reason we find it happening this way. Amazing things are possible. Amazing things. Individuals we may never thought in a million years would ever consider, not alone have a Bible study, but obeying the gospel as a result of that Bible study, and maybe even being a zealous member of the Lord's church. But that's what we find in Acts chapter 9. And verse 1 says, now Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, both men and women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. But we know what happened. Acts chapter 8 says Saul was also doing that in chapter 8, but the people had a mind to work, and they evangelized. And it says they went everywhere spreading the gospel. And when they were so committed to that, the one who is the chief agitator trying to tear those walls down ends up joining in the work, which is truly amazing. But we find there in verse 10, Acts chapter 9, verse 10, and I love this. Now there was a disciple. This was not an elder. This was not a pastor. It was not even identified as a located preacher. It says this was a disciple. One who, like everybody else, had joined themselves. And when they all were working together, God allowed Saul to spread out and reach amazing opportunities and build the work together. But it says there was a disciple at Damascus named Ananias. And the Lord said to him in a vision, Ananias. And he said, here I am, Lord. And that's all it takes. To have a mind to work, to say, here I am. I'm willing. I want to work. And I want to make it a priority. And God used this individual who was zealous, willing to share the message, even going to someone like Saul of Tarsus, and eventually spread the gospel to him. And it says in verse 10, or verse 11, the Lord said him, get up and go to the street called Straight and inquire at the house of Judas for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight. Love that account that never gets old, reading about the amazing conversion of Saul. But again, one thing I love about that in the theme of the book of Acts, it's not an accident. It's not something that happened out of the ordinary. It was a direct result of individuals that were committed to Jesus dying on the cross for them, and Jesus saying, go. Go. Share what you think about on the first day of the week. Share what you benefit by. Share that love that he has for others. And they all were committed, and vast individuals we read throughout the book of Acts build up what we know as the kingdom, the church. And we have a great opportunity to do that together. And so we just wanted to have a few words about that to maybe think about as we think about Nehemiah chapter 4. In his day, all it took was the right attitude, the right willingness to do it together. And amazing things are always possible when we do that. So again, if anyone is with us who is inspired by the things we read about someone like the Saul of Tarsus responding to the gospel and changing his life and being added to the kingdom, we encourage anyone who's with us to realize that no matter what sins in your life, just like Saul later preached, it doesn't matter. Saul became a great example as he became the Apostle Paul to demonstrate that the Lord is more than willing to forgive even the chief of sinners. And anyone else who has a willingness to, by faith, obey the gospel can be added and forgiven of all past sins and added to the work. If anyone has a desire to be added to the kingdom, to be baptized, forgiven of sins, we encourage you to do that while we stand and sing this song of encouragement together.